Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Team Stage 2, for all the preparation in advance. And thanks for being here in the audience. And yeah, maybe like me, you find compromises interesting and don't just think of them as bad or annoying. And so I'm going to try to look at this question in the next half an hour with you. How do people perceive compromises? What do we know about them? What's maybe not that great about the way that we treat compromises in public settings? And so we're at Republica, and so at the end we want to pose a question: how can we, how could this be better? So what is this about? Well, it's about something that keeps coming up in the political discourse. Compromises, to most people, are a constitutive element of democracy. So, for example, famous German politician Wolfgang Schäuble once called compromises a cardinal virtue of democracy. Or former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt said, if you're not able to do compromises, then you're not able to do democracy. And you're not fit for it. And so that sounds like compromises are this really fundamental thing, right? But still, we often get this feeling of being wrong, of compromises being this last resort and not done out of commitment. And so, yeah, you have to do a compromise because you can't come up with anything better. But in these two quotes that I just read, it seems like we should actually celebrate compromises, right? Like it's the thing that we need in our political system. And so when we look at ourselves and not at the political system, then maybe we get to this third bullet point here. And we can see compromise as an integral part of socialization. So we make compromises all the time, right? It's like brushing our teeth, for example. And if every day we would have this little notepad with us and then, cross part of it off for each compromise we make, I think that would be a great experiment, right? At the end of the day, we would find many, many strokes on that paper, I think. Because compromises don't have to be huge. They're also like minor sometimes. So, for example, if you disagree with someone when something was said, or if you, don't speak up when it happens, or in the supermarket when you have to decide between two items and then you choose a third item because it's a compromise between the first two. And so compromises, to quote Veronique Zanetti, a philosopher from University of Bielefeld, they're ways of regulating conflicts, which, might be in a supermarket, there's no conflict, but when we talk about political situations, to overcome conflicts by reciprocally giving in to the other. And so compromises live by... You can also make compromises with yourself. So, for example, if you have a trade partner and you make a compromise, you go a step in their direction. That's sort of there's this inner resistance, right? You gloss over your own feelings or your head feelings or your intuition, and so you search for this middle ground. And what today's talk is not about is this strict, a totalization of saying, oh, compromise, that's the greatest thing ever, like we should do them all the time. And we don't want to glorify them because, of course, we all know that there's really, really bad compromises. And there's compromises that are only that are paper tigers, right, that are forgotten as soon as the paper's gone. And there's also unsafe compromises because compromises where we find that, we've been fooled. And what this talk is also not about is that you have to make compromises all the time at any cost. in the contrary, I think in our current political climate, we see that oftentimes there's reasons to not make any compromises and to hold up our principles and stay true to ourselves and not go into the direction of giving in to other people. So let's think about this. Who here has made a compromise today? Yeah, you may also stand up. You might be a bit tired from lunch still. Yeah, quite some people. Okay, some people up front are standing up. Okay, and so the deciding question, was that a good compromise? Yeah, quite some hands going up. Or was it more of a bad compromise? Yeah, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so we also noticed from research on how compromises are being perceived. Oftentimes, for many people, not for all people, but for many, they're seen as losing your principles, as not standing your ground, as going against your own principles, and this like bad middle way, which you shouldn't do, and also as a sign of bad leadership, right? As weakness. Like anyone who does compromises, they don't have any authority. They aren't able to push through their own agenda. And from research in the USA, we also know that many people say, compromises are good. We should have more compromises. But they feel they're unattainable because they think politicians always look after their interests first. So, or maybe the interests of their party in a certain debate. But it's not about like the core of a compromise to bring two different positions together and build a bridge. Like metaphors like that. That's not the real motivation that politicians use. But we don't have to stay in the US. We can also look at Germany and think of Olaf Scholz, the former chancellor. When his coalition broke up a few months ago, in November last year, he said, I stand by having always sought out to enable compromises and consensus. And there's a problem in that statement, because a consensus is not compromise. So there's something going wrong here, and that's an example, but there's many, many more examples of something like that out there. Many people treat these terms as one and the same, consensus and compromise. And by not having this differentiation, we see how we're not able to value compromises as well as we should. And this goes hand in hand with a development that you may have noticed in the last few months or years, and that is people somehow find common ground by compromise, by consensus, and we feel like that's a given. So a well-known journalist from a newspaper in Berlin once told me recently, unity is not a new thing. Days where there's no debate, that's like, there's no news there, and then we have to brainstorm in our editorial room. And in that case, the journalist said, well, if in doubt, we just call up someone with very strong opinions, and then we have a statement that, that sort of goes against the grain and goes against the common compromise or common consensus, and thus we have a headline. And that's funny up to a point, right? Because when actors start in the public discourse, start to participate and gain rewards by saying, compromises suck. And so Stefan Mau and his team, they coined this term of polarization entrepreneurs. and these people just go around claiming compromises suck because they cover up the true will of the people. They don't allow the will of the people to come forward, and it's just this sort of repression of what the people actually want. And they, quote unquote, in power, they just think of themselves in Berlin, in Brussels, wherever, and they just want to, get richer and richer and don't care about regular people's needs. And we could care less about that as long as those actors wouldn't be as strong as they are right now. We've been talking about this in the past 3 days in multiple sessions, I think. And if we knew for sure that the others didn't become influenced by that. And so now let's talk about Friedrich Merz, the current German chancellor. When he had this immigration bill in the Bundestag a few weeks ago, he said, when it comes to these topics, there aren't any more compromises possible. And so when we think back about what I just expounded upon at the beginning, which you listened to, you may say, well, maybe he's right. Maybe there are topics, issues where we shouldn't have any more compromises. But if he's standing in front of German parliament, he doesn't get to decide that, right? Then you need majorities. You need people who have the same point of view as yourself. And so I think what back then really came into light is that it's not the majority of people who say, oh, that's right, that's true, we don't do any more compromises on these issues. But the majority was still saying, yeah, we should still have compromises on these issues of immigration. And so the cover of the German journal Der Spiegel, I found it quite interesting. It says, dialogue still possible. What happens when no one talks to no one anymore? And so we can see that our democracy is based on consensus. And so we really need these processes of balancing interests, respecting the interests of minorities, but also the belief of each and every individual that once, you might have an advantage by one compromise, that maybe the other side might have an interest the next time a compromise is made. And so why is that a problem? Right now, we see that politics is under a lot of pressure to make decisions. So it's very ad hoc, it's very reactive. Within a very short spans of time, politicians have to find answers. And that means that the process of listening to people, listening to various sides, and to, also keep people in the loop and not lose them. And so that has to go very, very fast. And politics cannot look into the future, cannot act proactively, because there's always something to respond to. And when we look at the situation, we find that there are other causes that make it even worse. So we have a declining acceptance because binding forces like churches, political parties, unions, they have less and less members, right? And so there's less social cohesion there. We have an increase in this polarized thinking, right? Thinking of others as the enemy. And if you have enemies, yeah, of course, why should you have compromises with your enemies? You fight with enemies, right? And you don't want them to stick around, but you don't want to sit at a table with your enemies and then just, try to find common solutions and find common ground. And of course, due to the right-wing authoritarian libertarian forces worldwide, they're on the rise. And so we also see that there's an attractiveness of this feeling of not making any compromises, like this, like strong, decisive decisions and not listening to each and everybody's opinion and yet once more. But we live in a time where we find that due to the increasing complexity of our society, we would need debates that are able to actually mirror what's happening in our society, where we have so many different interests that have to be balanced, and it keeps getting more complex. And so compromises are like a very important tool to bind this all together and to hold our society together. And when we look at what people think about this, we can also see that there's a resonance there, right?
For example, if you look at numbers from October 2017 in comparison to April 2025, and the question they were being asked, I hope you can all see that, is it like, how good do you think it is when politicians make compromises? And you can tell there's really like overwhelming agreement that it's important and it's good. Nevertheless, the headlines that we see, and I don't want to do like media, I don't want to just like bash German media here, but that's obviously the like a primary space where we encounter these questions. That it's just like just barely way of preventing a catastrophe, but it always sounds like really bad, like implying that they should have done it differently. But the fact that they were able to do it at all might be the like real news here. If you looking further, you can also tell that people like this generally positive attitude towards compromise is also connected to a huge worry, which is that this what was included in this Spiegel title, when nobody talks to anyone anymore, then that like parties can't actually do that anymore. So when asked if they have a feeling that parties are still able to find compromise between the different positions of different parties. And so here, you probably can't see that at all. If we're comparing values from 2019, and there's just like a decrease of 1 percentage point when it comes to people saying, I'm worried that parties in Germany are not able to find common answers to urgent political questions in Germany anymore. And so basically, to summarize, we can say people want compromises and they want politicians to make compromises, and they appeal to politicians and governments to make more compromises and stand up for them and sell the compromises that they make, so public communication. But at the same time, they say that they don't think it actually works. So they doubt that there is a willingness to find shared solutions. And they're worried that this willingness is lacking within the parties. And that's something that exists across all parties. So I don't know if you can see this. I hope you can see this. If you break this down by party, in this case, it's a survey for the editorial network in Germany, and it's broken down by job, but also by party preference. And there's like a large agreement to the statement, parties are incapable of compromise. The strongest agreement, like largest amount of agreement, is among voters of the AfD, where only 7% of people who prefer the AfD as a political party think that parties are still capable of compromise. You also, obviously, you can't misunderstand this either, because qualitative research shows that these attitudes often include the concern that the problem is that nobody wants to make compromises with us. But you see that even for voters of other parties, there's like a lot of doubt. And you see this even more strongly when you compare East and West Germany. These are numbers from 2024 from the Survey Institute Allensbach. And they find that in East Germany, there's like stronger agreement with the statement that we need a strong politician at the top, no endless debates and compromises. And my response would be maybe we need a strong politician, but that needs to be someone who is able to lead debates in a way that they lead to that the outcome are good compromises. That's like there's no contradiction, no inherent contradiction there. So let's look at the consequences of this. The problem like weakness rather than strength. So when it comes to political processes of negotiation, be it via media reporting, you can also ask yourself, what do I perceive, what do I see when I look at these processes of decision making? We often look at the weaknesses. We look at where things didn't work, where there was no agreement, where people had to fight again, where someone retracted their agreement or support for the compromise. Those are scandals. Those are headlines we click on. We don't look at stuff where people are like, oh, something worked. In a very boring way, they wrote a law that might actually make people's lives better. And that leads to unity being seen as something that's almost assumed, like we don't need to talk about that at all. But in a highly individualized society with a fragmented party system, which is so highly polarized, unity is actually the special and unusual thing that we ought to be talking about, because getting to that unity and compromise is harder and harder. In addition, and I think Lance Jacobsen of Die Zeit wrote something really good about that. For people who are for journalists, there's like another important thing, which is whenever you emphasize unity, whenever you speak about something in a positive way, you are scared of not seeming sufficiently critical of political institutions and politicians, as if you were essentially just just supporting them rather than critically looking at and analyzing them. And I don't think there is a good mode yet in the society that we live in today that enables us to really value where people are able to come together and are able to find compromises while also remaining a critical observer and finding and pointing out the problems. We just haven't found this mode yet. And so I think if we want to get to a point where we're able to appropriately value compromise, then I think this is something that we need to look at very closely. Relatedly, there's also like an important question: who still trusts whom? If we constantly imply or worry about that the other person is only looking out for their own interests, and there is no conviction that we might positions A and B might lead to a new position C, but only if it's essentially like this zero-sum thinking. If it's about I'm want to get something from the other side. And just for the end, I just want to draw a connection to unity and togetherness in society and societal cohesion. And you may be able to tell that I'm getting more and more emotional, because the wild thing is that we have this huge potential in our society, because if you look at larger studies about societal cohesion, we find that people want cohesion. Even those who you might not expect to want cohesion. People say that they feel like societal cohesion is trending downwards, it's getting weaker. It's kind of retrenching, and they say that there's many reasons, but they say one reason is increasing egoism and self-centeredness, and that's poison for an ability to find compromises, because if everyone only considers their own interests, then I'm not in a place where I can find shared solutions and common ground with others. What I find even wilder, I mean, it's good that someone did this research, but it's wild that they found this. But from a study titled More in Common, published about German society in 2023, that did quantitative and qualitative research on societal cohesion. And they found that a majority of people say that they want social cohesion, But if you go to the other side of the street and you ask my neighbors, like, they don't want societal cohesion, and then you go to the neighbor, and the neighbor says, oh, I obviously want cohesion and solidarity and unity, but oh no, that person over there, like on the other side of the street, you forget about it. So there's actually a huge potential if a majority of people, not everyone, but like a majority of people are looking in the same direction, then that should be an opportunity to propose more compromises and propose this position, like this idea that it's valuable and that it's worth it to go through this arduous journey of finding compromises and through these negotiations. And I'll skip this. And that also applies across generations, which is the topic of this Republica. And what we find, there's like kilometers worth of studies that find this, that the topics that are important to, and the questions important to young people are more or less the same that apply, and they're important to older people. We also cannot pretend like we are incapable of making compromises because the young people are only interested in the climate. And older people are only interested in retirement and pensions, but sorry, that's just wrong. Mostly they are interested in the same things. So it should theoretically be a possibility, an option to find compromise this year. So what a new appreciation for compromise could get us, in my opinion, is the following. It could lead to more cohesion across generations by noticing or paying attention to the fact that we actually care about the same questions. Although we need to, for example, there's topics like pensions, care work, those are cross-generational questions. But we need to be able to find solutions together, not make a decision without involving the other people who are affected. But it cannot be solved by having this. Remember the citation from Olaf Scholz. We can't have we can't fetishize consensus. For example, if you tell me, oh, Julia, this pink blazer really doesn't work on you, and I listen to you and I say, yes, you're right, that's consensus. But compromises, I stick with my original conviction, but am still capable of taking a step towards you and saying, you have your conviction, I have my conviction, but we find a new shared position between the two of us. I think that could be a counter force to effective polarization that we have seen, have been able to measure in numbers more and more over the last few months. So, for example, I would refer you to the post-election study by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is generally not suspected of just putting out left-wing positions, even by conservatives. We could put something up against the chainsaws of this world. We are courageous. We are willing to accept this annoyingness, this stress, this pressure that's required for making a compromise because we want to take everyone along. We could present unity and agreement as a strength, and at the same time ensure that the differences remain visible. Ideally, we would find new spaces for that. We would create new spaces for that. And sorry, Republica is a bit of a cohort meeting where everyone there's a lot of unity. People tend to agree a lot, which I'm sure is really good for a lot of people. But we also need spaces where people can experience difference. It's not always about consensus and harmony and everything being great, but it's also about experiencing differences and being able to bear difference, but creating something new and shared from that. And lastly, maybe that's the most important thing when you talk for 30 minutes here as a political scientist, we could try to compensate for something that we have lost. For, we have been seeing for months, that acceptance for and trust in democratic institutions is diminishing. And of course, we can try to regain it and rebuild it, but we could, through a new appreciation for compromise, we could also increase the legitimacy of and support for processes if we trust the actors to a limited degree when it comes to what they say, why they're doing what they're doing and what they're doing, then maybe at least I can create a small commitment when it comes to when people are able to trust the process, that there was negotiation, that people were involved, that it wasn't just the chainsaw, that different positions were considered. And how we can do that is something I'm happy to talk to you about in groups of 2 or 3 afterwards. But my time is up, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Reuschenbach. Very good presentation. I also thought I was imagining it, but is that your fan club in the first row? So for everyone who still needs to go outside, for everyone who needs to still do a talk here, bring an umbrella.